Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. Today we will be presenting on the concept of bid'ah according to Sunnah wal Jamaah, a comparative analysis with the Shia viewpoint, which is an important topic in Islamic theology and legal discussion. The concept of bid'ah is closely related to effort to preserve the purity and authenticity of Islamic teaching as conveyed by the Prophet Muhammad SAW. From the perspective of Sunnah wal Jamaah, bid'ah is defined as the introduction of new belief or practice into the religion that have no basis in the Quran, the Sunnah, or the understanding of the Salaf as-Saleh. The view emphasizes strict adherence to revealed source and the scholarly methodology developed to protect the integrity of Islamic teaching. The Shia viewpoint accords special religion authority to the Imam from the Ahlul Bait. Within this tradition, the legitimacy of religion practice is also determined by the teaching and narration attributed to these imams, even if such practice are not recognized within the Sunnah wal Jamaah tradition. This difference reflects the distant source of religion authority between the two schools of thought and shape their respective interpretation of bid'ah. Next, research objective. Our research aims to achieve three main objectives. First, to examine the concept of bid'ah according to the perspective of Sunnah wal Jamaah. Second, to analyze the understanding of bid'ah from the Shia viewpoint. Last, to compare both perspectives in order to identify their similarity and differences. Problem statement. Although bid'ah is often discussed in Islam, there is still confusion and different opinion about its meaning and practice among Muslims. This happens because Muslims interpret the Quran and Sunnah in different ways. As a result, a practice accepted by one group may be considered bid'ah by another. This difference can lead to misunderstanding and tension between Muslim community, affecting unity and harmony.
I will explain the background of Sunnah wal Jamaah and Shia Islam, focusing on how both traditions emerged in early Islamic history. Sunnah wal Jamaah, commonly known as Sunni Islam, literally means the people who follow the Sunnah of the Prophet and uphold the unity of the Muslim community. This concept developed gradually in the early centuries of Islam as scholars and jurists sought to preserve the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and the practices of his companions. Over time, Sunni identity became closely associated with adherence to the Quran, the authenticated Hadith tradition, communal consensus or ijma, and the legal methodologies of established schools of jurisprudence. Today, Sunni Islam represents the majority of Muslims worldwide and generally places less emphasis on hereditary leadership. In regions such as Southeast Asia, including the Malay world, Sunni identity was further shaped by local scholars, traditional Islamic institutions, and reform movement. In contrast, Shia Islam, which comes from the phrase the party of Ali, emerged from early disagreements over leadership after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE. Shia Muslims believed that Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, was divinely appointed to lead the Muslim community. Shia identity became more prominent during the first fitna, a period of civil conflict that intensified debates about authority and succession. Shia theology later developed around the doctrine of the imamate, which holds that leadership belongs to divinely guided imams from the Prophet's family, known as Ahlul Bait. These imams are believed to possess special spiritual authority and religious knowledge. The main difference between Sunni and Shia Islam lies in their understanding of religious authority. Sunni Islam emphasizes leadership through consultation and community consensus, while Shia Islam stresses leadership through the lineage of the Prophet's family. This foundational difference shaped the distinct theological, legal, and institutional developments of both traditions.
Now I will briefly explain the concept of bid'ah or religious innovation from the perspective of Sunnah wal Jamaah and Shia. In Sunni thought, bid'ah refers to introducing something into the religion that has no basis in the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, or the established practice of the early Muslim community. Classical scholars emphasized that Islamic worship must follow prophetic guidance, as Islam was perfected during the Prophet's lifetime. This is supported by the Quranic commands, which means whatever the messengers give you, take it, and whatever he forbids you, abstain from it. In Surah Al-Hajj, verse 7. Although the Prophet ﷺ stated that every innovation is misguidance in one of the Sahih Muslim hadith, Sunni scholars did not approach this issue simplistically. Imam Ash-Shafi'i distinguished between innovations that contradict the Sunnah, which are rejected, and the innovations that align with the objective of Sharia, which may be accepted. This distinction later developed into the concept of bid'ah hasanah and bid'ah sayyi'ah. But Imam Ash-Shatibi offered a more technically definitions. He describing bid'ah as an invented religious practice that imitates the Sharia and is performed as worship. He highlighting intention as a key factor. In determining whether something is bid'ah, Sunni scholars rely on the Quran, Sunnah, consensus, which is ijma', and analogical reasoning, which is qiyas. This careful evaluation reflects to one of the Quranic verses, which means, "Today I have perfected your religion for you." Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 3. This verse reinforcing the idea that worship should not be altered without valid evidence. Therefore, any new act of worship must be evaluated carefully. A commonly discussed example is the celebration of the Prophet's birthday, also called as Maulid. Some scholars regarded it as a blameworthy innovation, while others permit it under specific condition, provided it does not contradict with Islamic principles. So overall, Ahl-Sunnah wal Jamaah views bid'ah not as the rejection of all new practices, but as a safeguard against deviation from prophetic guidance. Therefore, evaluating new religious practices requires knowledge, scholarly authority, and adherence to the Sunnah to ensuring the preservation of authentic Islamic teachings. I will now outline the concept of bid'ah from the perspective of Shia. In Shia thought, bid'ah refers to introducing beliefs or religious practices that lack guidance from the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ, or the divinely guided imams from the Ahlul Bayt. Shia scholars emphasize that religious validity depends not only on revelation, but also on the authoritative interpretation transmitted through the imams, who are regarded as the rightful inheritors of the Prophet's guidance. This understanding is often supported by the Quranic verse from Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 73, which means, "And we made them leaders guiding by our command," which reinforces their central concept of imamate. Classical Shia scholars such as Al-Mufid at-Tusi define bid'ah as introducing religious rulings or acts of worship without textual evidence from the Quran or authentic teaching of the imams. Later scholars including Al-Alama Al-Hilli and Abul Qasim Al-Kuwi further emphasized that new devotional acts cannot be assigned religious merit unless they are clearly supported by divine or imamic authority. This approach is also rooted in the prophetic traditions known as Hadith al-Thaqalain, which instructs Muslims to hold firmly to both the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt to avoid misguidance.
Now, let's look at the similarities of these two views on the concept of bid'ah. Both traditions share a core understanding. Bid'ah refers to religious innovations that contradict foundational sources of Islam. In the Ash'ari tradition, Al-Nawawi says, any innovation that contradicts the Sharia is a misguided bid'ah. In the Shia tradition, Sheikh Al-Mufis asserts bid'ah is any practice that contradicts the Book of God, the Sunnah of the Prophet, and the statements of the Imams.
Both traditions recognize that religion has normative boundaries, and any innovation without legitimate evidence constitutes epistemological deviation. Innovation aligned with core principles are not blameworthy. Al-Shafi'i says, if innovations align with the principles of the Sharia, they are not blameworthy. In Shia, Al-Alamah Al-Hili says, anything supported by a Sharia principle or general rule is not considered bid'ah even if it is new. Further differences of view mainly appear in evaluation, authority, and legal framework. Sunni Ash'ari approach evaluates bid'ah through maslahah and maqasid al-Sharia. Al-Aiz ibn Abdul al-Salam classifies bid'ah into obligatory, prohibited, recommended, disliked, and permissible. In Shia, Imami approach emphasizes authority of the Imams and continuity of transmitted knowledge. Al-Alamah Al-Hili states, whatever has no foundation in the statements of the Imam or the Sunnah of the Prophet is a false innovation. They focus on legitimacy through Ahlul Al-Bayt, epistemic continuity, transmitted narrations. Lastly, historical development influenced how each tradition conceptualized bid'ah. First, in the early Islam, on 1st century, bid'ah was mainly a moral and spiritual warning, preserving the Sunnah of the Prophet. They focus on core creed and worship. For the Sunni post-classical period, scholars like Al-Shafi'i, Al-Nawawi, Al-Aiz ibn Abdul Salam developed systematic frameworks. Bid'ah became an evaluative tool, assessing whether practices contradict textual sources or align with maqasid. In Shia tradition, development linked into imamate authority and continuity of prophetic knowledge. Scholars like Al-Mufid, Al-Murtada, and Al-Hili emphasizes the narration of the Ahlul Al-Bayt as the core source of legitimacy. To conclude this presentation, this study shows that the concept of bid'ah in both the Ash'ari Sunni tradition and the Imami Shi'i tradition is not shaped solely by legal rulings, but is deeply rooted in their respective theological histories, epistemological frameworks, and the structures of religious authority. Both traditions share a similar objective, which is to preserve the authenticity of Islamic teachings and to reject any religious practice that lack authoritative grounding in the foundational sources of Islam. However, the key difference lies on how each tradition evaluates bid'ah. These differences should not be seen as theological contradiction, but rather as the result of distinct intellectual and historical trajectories within the development of Islamic thought. I hope that this research contributes toward a more mature and analytical understanding of both Sunni and Shi'i intellectual heritage, while opening greater space for constructive scholarly dialogue and meaningful engagement within the wider Muslim Ummah. Thank you.